I'm Heather, and this is the Living with Addiction podcast, where I show you how you have more power than you realize when it comes to helping yourself and your child that's struggling with addiction. Hello, welcome to episode 6 of the Living with Addiction podcast. So, I spend a lot of time thinking about my before and after, and the before and after of the parents that I work with. And when I say before and after, I mean before is when my daughter's addiction was in control of my life and running the show, and I was completely dependent on her changing so that I could feel better. And after is me having the confidence in myself to know that I can handle any situation. And I know that 100% my peace of mind and happiness depends on me, and she doesn't have to change in order for me to be happy. And there's specific changes that take place in that before and after process. And this is one of those major differences that I'm going to talk about today. Last week in the episode about control, I shared how parents who are empowered in creating their own relief from their child's addiction have taken ownership in the situation. They're no longer dependent on their kids for relief because they're creating that relief for themselves. They know that their relief can only come from them. And what I'm going to share today is one of the things that happens after a parent takes ownership. It's part of that process. So, have you ever thought about how each word that we use evokes a feeling? Some words are heavily loaded and have all kinds of feelings attached to them. They just create all these emotions. And other words are pretty neutral, like it's just no big deal when you hear that word. And two different people can experience the same word with two very different feelings. And I mean, like one word I can think. So the word lake, and I'm just picking any random word here. One person might have a wonderful feeling, when they hear that word. They're going to have all these childhood memories of beautiful days spent on the lake with their family. And then another person who maybe they couldn't swim and they almost drowned in the lake as a child can have memories of, fear and terror. And it's one word, the same word, and it sparks so many different thoughts for each person. And that's why how we think and talk about our child's addiction is so important. And when I'm working with someone who is in like just that deep pit of despair about their child's addiction, the way they talk about it is totally different than someone who has done a lot of work to get to the other side of that despair. The words that they use as they're talking to me are completely different. And that means that their inner dialogue, the thoughts that they're thinking, the way that they're thinking about themselves, the way they're thinking about their life and their child and their addiction is totally different too. And so the way that a new client describes their situation to me really helps me figure out where I need to meet them, because my work isn't one size fits all. I meet my clients where they are. And I can tell so much just by the words that they're using as they're describing their situation to me. And it's the same thing with me. The way I think and talk about my daughter's addiction is full of perspective and intention now because I'm on the other side of that process. But because of the way I talk about it now, sometimes people think my experience has been easier than theirs just because of the way they hear me talk about it. But I guarantee you that if you heard me talk about it or I shared my thoughts with you 5 years ago, they were drastically different. My thoughts were nothing will ever work. I can't do this anymore. My daughter's going to overdose and die. Her life is ruined. My life is ruined. We'll never recover from this. I don't know what to do to help her. I mean, it was just on and on thoughts like that. I lived in total despair. And my thoughts and the way I talked about my situation with my daughter's addiction and really, just spread into most of my life just created more despair for me. And there was no separateness between me and what I was thinking. And the way that you create that separateness is to just start becoming very aware of everything you think and say, especially when you have all or nothing type thinking in words. That's exactly what my thoughts were before. They were totally black and white. There was no gray area. You know, everything was tragic. It would never get better. There was probably only one way out, and I would never find it. We were stuck. I was using words like nothing, never, her ruined. Like there was just no way that things were ever going to get better that way. And when we think things over and over again, we start to believe them. Thoughts, that's what beliefs are. They're just thoughts that we think over and over again. And so the way that I was talking and thinking about my daughter's addiction was creating beliefs that were just causing me more pain. They were keeping me stuck. So I really had to learn to observe that inner dialogue and listen to how I talked to people about my situation before I could change it. So I just want to offer you to observe yourself and your interaction with other people, how you're talking about your child's addiction, yourself, your life. Just observe all of that with curiosity and compassion. Lay down the judgment. None of these exercises, anything that I share with you, judgment is just going to keep you stuck. You just have to let go of the judgment and be curious and have compassion for yourself. You can also write about it. Writing about it is very powerful. You can sit down and write down all of your thoughts about your child's addiction, and you can write down what you're making it mean about you, because whatever you're making it mean about you can be just make the situation so much more painful. And so a lot of times we don't even realize what we're thinking until, or even really what we're saying. We're just going around on autopilot. But that exercise of writing things down and then rereading it can be very powerful. So you might feel some resistance to it, but it's definitely worth the time because it's going to help you change how you're approaching the situation. So once you're clear about the words that you're using and the emotions that they bring up when you use those words, I want you to weed out those really triggering words and look for replacements for them. So, as I talked about before, like the word lake might be neutral for one person or happy and terrifying for another. So just look for those words that bring up a lot of pain in you and replace those words. Be very intentional with how you're thinking about the situation, with how you're talking to other people about it. You are setting the tone for your story about it and for your experience every time you think about it and talk about it. So replacing those words with ones that are less painful or even neutral will be very helpful to you in order to move forward. And that's how you write your own story and change it. It's being very intentional, creating intentional thoughts and speaking intentionally about your situation. And this is part of the process that I went through in order to transform from a mom who was overwhelmed and helpless and didn't feel like I could do it anymore. I just needed somebody to tell me what to do so that I could help my daughter, to a mom who I'm confidently leading the way for other parents and helping them find answers. And that is a major change from feeling like I couldn't even help myself to now I'm able to help other people. And this was a really important part of the process that I went through. And I know that this sounds simple, but it's very powerful. They're often the things that we need to do to make changes in our life are very simple. So we have a tendency to undervalue them. But it is so powerful to go through this process and be very intentional with how you are thinking and talking about your situation, because it is creating the life that you're living. And if you feel resistant to anything you hear me say on my podcast, remember that the human brain does not like change. It associates the efficiency of staying the same with safety. It doesn't matter if what you've been doing is really keeping you safe or not. It just wants to stay the same. So remember that that's the resistance that always comes up, that when you want to make change. So just expect that resistance and stay open to observing yourself. Remember, with compassion and curiosity, and just be open also to the idea that what I've shared today can help you. Your situation can get better. So, just to wrap it up, the first step is creating awareness of what you're thinking and saying and how it makes you feel about your child's addiction. Second is write down your thoughts about your child's addiction and what you're making it mean about you. Third, question all of it. There's the possibility that you don't even agree with the things that you're thinking and saying. They're just habits. You just started thinking and saying it, and you've kept thinking and saying it because remember what I said about the brain not liking change and efficiency. And that's how a lot of our beliefs are formed kind of accidentally, and why it's so important to stop and be very intentional with what you're thinking and saying and questioning it and choosing it over again or choosing something different. And the fourth thing is pick all the words that are highly emotional and triggering, especially the ones you use over and over again, and replace them with more neutral words. The words you use have such a big impact on your life. So choose them very carefully. And that's all I have for you this week. It's a short one, so use the time you would have spent listening to the rest of the podcast to actually go through and take these steps. And I promise you, it works. I'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about my work, go to heatherrosscoaching.com. If you want to help other parents who are struggling with a child's addiction, you can do it two different ways. First, you can share the podcast with them directly, or you can share it on your social media. Second, you can leave a review. Talk to you next week.